we'll look at his social teachings, basically. But before we go into his talks in South America in July, I think we'll just take a brief look at one point that he makes in his encyclical, Laudato Si. The title of it is Laudato Si, on care for our common home. Common home meaning the earth in which we live, our human society, the ecology, the environment, all of that together. It's really quite readable and I think very inspiring. So this was issued on May 24th of this year, just a few months before his trip to the 3 countries of South America. He talks a lot in his writings about the maximization of profits, or profit almost as an idol. He's not a communist, he's not Marxist, although he's been accused of that, and he has said that he's not Marxist, but many of his friends are, and they're good people, so he doesn't mind being called a Marxist. But he's not. He's always been a promoter of the Christian social doctrine, the Catholic social doctrine of the church, which is not revolutionary. It's pretty much within the capitalist framework, but it's critical of the excesses of capitalism, the abuses that are committed by the maximization of profits. So this is what he says in one paragraph in Laudato Si, his encyclical. The principle of the maximization of profits, frequently isolated from other considerations, reflects a misunderstanding of the very concept of the economy. Says at the end, businesses profit by calculating and paying only a fraction of the costs involved. And now this is a key point in his encyclical. The mindset which leaves no room for sincere concern for the environment is the same mindset which lacks concern for the inclusion of the most vulnerable members of society. I think one of the major steps forward in his encyclical was to make this connection. It's the connection between the growing poverty in the world in which we live, the marginalization of the poor. We see that more dramatically in Latin America, but I think we're seeing it more and more here. The huge gap between the super rich and the poor and the very poor. But he's making connection between that, social injustice, social inequality, and the harm that we're doing to the environment. And he's saying that basically it's the same selfish motivation for the maximization of profits, which results in either the exploitation of various groups in society, or the exploitation of the poor, or the exclusion of them. They're not, more and more masses of people are not even included in the economy. But he's tracing both the harm to the environment, harm to the earth and so forth, tracing that to the same motive that results in harm to people. That is, if we have a selfish, self-centered lust for profit, for so-called advancement, for accumulation of wealth and property, that will harm the environment and it will harm people. So he's making that connection, which I think is extremely important. So it's the same mindset. It's the mindset of, as I said, the idolization, making an idol of money. And we know Jesus himself said you cannot serve both God and mammon, that is money. Money as an idol. We all need money, right? Can't get along with that. But to make an idol of that, to say that I need to maximize my income and my property and my wealth with no concern for the environment, no concern for the damage to the earth, and no concern for the damage to people, exploitation of people and so forth, that is essentially, we would say, sinful from a Christian point of view. Sin being harming people, or now we're saying harming the environment. We're to love one another and care for one another and care for the environment. If we just care about ourselves and the maximization of my comfort, my property, my security, people having more money than they know what to do with, then we are not loving one another, we're hurting one another. So he's applying that. Many Catholics have thought of sin only in regard to sexual matters. Well, we can commit sin by hurting our common home, by doing harm to our common home, which is the earth, the entire earth in which we live, as well as by doing harm either to individual persons or to groups through racism, sexism, and so forth. We do harm to large groups of people. So I think it's a very rich document. I would recommend this document to you. As I said, it's Laudato Si, it's called, on care for our common home. It's that same selfish lust, not for sexual things, but that lust for money and for property and for wealth and all the excesses that many people think is the meaning of life. It's that is at the heart of the harm that we're doing to the environment and at the heart of the exploitation of the poor, the exploitation of various groups, or the exclusion of them. They're not even exploited, they're just excluded. But it's the same indifference and selfishness and insensitivity which results in both harm to the environment and harm to people. So let's go to South America with him. In July, I have some arrows there. You see, first he went to Ecuador, that's towards the top of South America, and then about in the middle is Bolivia, and finally the arrow coming in from the right is Paraguay. He went to those three countries, spent 2 or 3 days in each country. Now in Ecuador, he met with the leaders in Quito, the capital of Ecuador. Now I would like to emphasize the goods of the earth are meant for everyone, and however much someone may parade his property, it has a social mortgage. This way we move beyond truly economic justice and so forth. That's a key statement. The goods of the earth are meant for everyone, and however much someone may parade his property, it has a social mortgage. Some people think that this is communist, this is Marxist. It's not. It's well within the tradition of Catholic social doctrine, Catholic social teaching. We'll see something very soon from Pope Leo XIII's encyclical on labor, which he issued in 1891, when industrial capitalism was beginning to exploit the earth and exploit the workers. So in that encyclical from 1891, Pope Leo XIII affirmed the right of workers to organize. That's been a constant theme in Catholic social doctrine, the right of workers to organize into unions, to pressure for decent wages, better working conditions, and so forth. Also, part of the Catholic social doctrine, we say Christian social doctrine because it goes back to the Bible, really, and it goes back to the early centuries of the church, is, you can call it the social mortgage of property, or sometimes it's referred to as the universal destination of goods. That is, that there is a right to private property, that the Catholic Church goes along with that. But it's not an unrestricted, unlimited, unconditional right. You cannot do anything you want with your private property, especially if you're a large business person or capitalist or industrialist. There are limits on what you can do with your private property. And so one way of putting that is that it has a social mortgage. That is, it needs to be seen in the context. You have a right to private property, but it needs to be seen in the context of the common good. It needs to serve the common good. Right now people are saying, well, we can't interfere with our profits by trying to cut back on pollution. We had this case in the newspaper just the other day of Volkswagen deliberately rigging their pollution control devices in their cars to be able to pass the test, you know. And it's just a gross violation of honesty and the law and morality. I mean, but people would say, well, we need to maximize our profits. We have no time, we cannot lose any money by limiting our production or by investing money in other kinds of things. Well, that is not in accord with Christian social doctrine. And this is a constant. We'll see a little bit more of the background of this. Now, another interesting document by this Pope, which came out in his first year as Pope, Evangelii Gaudium, the joy of the gospel. He's a very joyful person, and he believes the gospel, which means good news, should be the cause of joy for people. It should be, it's the mercy of God, it's the hope for the poor, it's the hope for a better life in this world. So the joy of the gospel. And this is one statement that he makes there. Now this is from St. John Chrysostom, so it goes way back. And St. John Chrysostom said, not to share one's wealth with the poor is to steal from them and to take away their livelihood. It is not our own goods which we hold, but theirs. This is quite a radical statement. Somebody might say, oh, that sounds like Karl Marx, you know. But it's not. It's just pure Christian charity, you know, being applied to economic questions. Especially if we have more than we need, then we have an obligation to help others who don't have what is sufficient. Now, getting back to his talk in Ecuador, it talks about the natural resources. Ecuador has been the scene of some very important, very serious controversies between oil companies and the Ecuadorian government. So that's why there he was talking especially about the environment. It must not be concerned with short-term benefit. As stewards of these riches which we have received, we have an obligation towards society as a whole and towards future generations. You know, what about people who have no concern for their grandchildren or their great-grandchildren or future generations? What kind of world are we leaving to them? It's a serious lack of love for people we can't see. They're not born yet, but they're coming. And you know, we're supposed to be so loving and concerned about our children and grandchildren. Well, what about the children of the grandchildren and maybe a couple of generations into the future? We're even seeing more and more harm to the environment and to people even now. So part of our love needs to deal with the environmental issues. Otherwise, what are we leaving to people? We're leaving a world of increasing hunger, increasing drought, which we're seeing in Nicaragua, all along the Pacific coast, from California down, well, Oregon, California down through Mexico, down through Central America. There is serious drought. It's more serious this year than in the past. And so farmers are just losing their crops. They're not even planting because you lose the seeds that you plant. And it's just becoming more and more of a serious issue. So part of our moral concern is the future generations. What are we leaving to future generations? So this should be an important motivation for us to get busy and try to do something before it's too late. Many people think it's already too late to do anything about the deterioration of the environment. Pope says no, and I don't know, I think with President Obama's initiatives, do more, but I think he's doing quite a bit, and the Pope's, the Pope's writings, the Pope's visit here, the big meeting coming up in Paris, meeting of the governments of the world. China now seems to be more interested in doing something. Let's hope that humanity can wake up and see that our love for one another needs to extend to our love for the world in which we live and our love for future generations. I put this comment in there myself. That's my own editorial comment, my own title. Love your grandchildren as yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself. love your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren as yourself. And that's really what the Pope was saying in Ecuador, and as well as in his encyclical. Now there's a word, integral, teacher of integral ecology. We should use the word holistic. Holistic would be a better word. And he deals with that constantly, that everything is connected and interconnected. That's what integral means. But I think holistic would be a better word. So as I said before, integral or holistic ecology would bring out the fact that the maximization of profit, the selfish lust for accumulation of more and more goods, that has an effect not only on the environment, but on people and peoples, large groups of people. That's being integral, being holistic. And so we receive this world as an inheritance from past generations, but also as a loan from future generations to whom we will have to return it. Now, just going back to show you a little bit of the historical context of this question of, again, private property. You know, do people have an absolute unconditional right to do what they want with their property or their wealth? Well, no. That's been a constant theme in Christian social doctrine. So this goes back to the encyclical of Pope Leo XIII, which I mentioned before, on Capital and Labor, where he strongly affirmed the right of workers to organize. So this is how he starts out. Riches do not bring freedom from sorrow, nor the for eternal happiness, rather obstacles, the rich should tremble. So he's referring to some of the harsh, radical statements in the gospel. You know, you cannot serve God and mammon. You cannot serve God and money. You cannot make an idol. You cannot live just for more and more money. I mean, many people live just to get enough. You know, you have to struggle to get enough money. That's different. That's perfectly normal and understandable. But to maximize our wealth and our profits at the cost of people and at the cost of the world in which we live is immoral from a gospel point of view. You know, you think of the rich man who had so much money, the gospel says he didn't know what to do with it all. So he built more barns. He built more barns. And then he dies all of a sudden. And he said, well, where is it? It's all gone. And he's, you know, he saved this all up, stored this all up, but it's not his anymore. He's dead. So the rich fool is the title of that passage. Or the rich man who did not share anything with Lazarus. And Lazarus was trying to receive the crumbs from the table, and it turns out that Lazarus, the poor man, is with God in the kingdom, and this rich man is not. So his only sin, if you will, was failing to share. He didn't share anything with the poor man who was starving. But I'm interested more here in the history of the social doctrine of the church, and how it shows that property has a social mortgage, or that there is a universal destination of all goods. All goods are meant to serve the common good. So Pope Leo XIII, again, back in 1891, so he recognizes the right to money, private ownership, absolutely necessary and so forth. Now he cites St. Thomas Aquinas, the great theologian of the Middle Ages, who was pretty much standard doctrine in Catholicism for many centuries. It is lawful for a man, right, he was back in the Middle Ages, to hold private property. But how must one's possessions be used? The Church replies without hesitation in the words of the same holy doctor. You know, doctor means teacher, essentially. Man should not consider his material possessions as his own, but as common to all, so as to share them without hesitation when others are in need. So again, this very strong theme in Catholic social teaching. Now, Mater et Magistra, coming up more close to our modern times, 1961, Pope John XXIII, some people said, Mater si, Magistra no. So mother, and it means mother and teacher. So people would say, mothers, yes. Teacher, no. when the church is trying to teach this kind of stuff, we recognize that as our mother, but not as our teacher. So out with this Marxist socialist doctrine. See, that's what a lot of the right-wing, very conservative, wealthy people would say. But it's very clear. Private ownership of property, natural right, all right, so we're always recognizing that. Yes, it is a natural right, but with limits, and it entails a social obligation as well. Must be exercised not only for one's own personal benefit, but also for the benefit of others.